Well, sprint qualifying for China, the headline news, Mercedes on top again by a significant margin as well. George Russell driving beautifully, great lap. I mean, if anybody's perfectly suited to this era, whatever this era is, I suspect it's George Russell, because he's an amazing combination of very fast racing driver, incredible judgment, precision, very intelligent in terms of a racing intelligence, understanding what it takes to put it all together, born of changing chains and gear ratios on karts from when he was a kid in the rain in England and going from there, like a lot of drivers, but nonetheless not afraid to get his hands dirty. And at the same time, right on top, a lot of it, I guess, the momentum of being with Mercedes and how good Mercedes are in every detail, right on top of this modern software and technology and how to maximize it. And he's putting it all together in the cockpit of a Formula One racing car. And I think one of the biggest mistakes we can probably all make this year is to take George for granted and say, oh yeah, another pole for George or whatever it's going to be, because this guy's getting better all the time, looking really, really good. Wonderful to watch. Very professional. And Kimi Antonelli backing him up, the perfect other driver now. And we saw that today. Very, very good performance from both of them. Excellent. Ferrari, not bad, but in the end, it was Lando Norris who came almost from nowhere, seemingly from nowhere, to take P3 for McLaren-Mercedes. McLaren getting a little bit nearer and a little bit ahead of Ferrari, but not by much. Very close between those two. Good lap by Lando. Classic Lando. Very, very rhythmic and nice to watch. But not a McLaren, not in the Mercedes class right now. Different gear ratios as well. I mean, I wonder whether this is one of the areas in which the Mercedes customer teams are feeling it this year and against the factory team. The ratios they've got are obviously clearly different, and that will work on some circuits, I guess, but primarily not on others, because Mercedes factory team right on the ball. And, you know, that may be something to do with the factory team being on top of heat rejection, maybe other areas of, you know, cooling in general of the engine, and maybe we're able to be a bit more precise in what they were doing with ratios. And maybe that's one area where I guess the customer teams might feel they haven't had the same access to information. But then, you know, if you can actually do that, if you can withhold that info legally, you would do it, wouldn't you? And I think it's quite good actually to see a factory engine supplier actually having a slight advantage over its customers, as it should be. All this business about equality, you know, it's not. This is Formula One. Ferrari, very good as well. Had a slight little mod, nice little winglet on the halo for both cars. Not sure if it made any difference. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. But for me, the one of the outstanding things today actually was Lewis Hamilton. The aspects of the day, how well he drove, and how fluid he's looking in the car now. And to me, it was all summed up by the last corner, which I've always said on many videos talking about China, is an incredibly difficult corner. It's a little bit like that left-hander at the top of the hill at Imola. And remember, I was going on about how part of it is that it's a left-hander. We don't have that many left-handers that are really demanding corners. And this is, of course, in China, because it's leading onto the main straight there, or the pit straight. And an exit there is all important. And it's almost as if the track narrows halfway through. That's what it feels like, because you've got the pit lane exit on the right-hand side there. Everything's happening. You've got the big grandstands. It's not 90 degrees. It's quite a quick corner, but it's very, very easy, as we've seen, to get it wrong going in. Max Verstappen using a little bit too much curb, in my opinion, in SQ2 today on his second run. Admittedly, the tires had gone off and the lap wasn't great anyway, but Max just a tad too much curb going in and ran wide onto the gravel. And, you know, at that moment, of course, it was a great moment to say the car is undrivable, which he did. But the difference for me between Lewis and Charles today was actually most noticeable going into that last corner. And for all Lewis fans out there, I can say, you know, to me, okay, one thing we should say here in mitigation, this was a Friday, and I don't think we ever see the very best of Charles Leclerc on a Friday. He tends to get better and better as the weekend goes on. I know it's sprint qualifying, I know it's important, but nonetheless, it's still a Friday. But going into that last corner, Lewis, I thought, was absolutely perfect because the curb's on the right, and it's most drivers. Ollie Berman, good example, when he ran wide, they tend to use a little bit too much curb, and Max too. And if the rear catches the curb, that's when it can unsettle the car. And Lewis was the right front just skims the curb on entry, and then immediately he's got a lovely curved entry into the corner, and the rear is going nowhere near the curb. And it's Lewis Hamilton short corners 2021 spec. For me, that was what we saw today for Lewis going into that last corner, and that's how he did that lap. Just beautiful to watch. And it's interesting that the cameras then caught him mid corner, and there's a little bit of oversteer, and he catches a sort of bit of curb on exit, and that's what they're focusing. Oh, Lewis mid corner. But for me, I mean, that was kind of irrelevant. He'd done the great work by then. For me, it was all about the entry into that corner that allowed him to do that and get away with it. It was what he was doing on the platform going in. And Charles wasn't doing that today, really. He was, but he was doing it in a little bit more spiky way than Lewis. Lewis really soft in everything he was doing. And I think that was, to his credit, really good job. And he's starting to, if that is the beginning of the return of Lewis Hamilton going into corners and the way he's going, then he's going to be right there. That was amazing to me. I haven't seen Lewis driving like that for at least, I don't know, 2.5 years. Just brilliant. Max Verstappen. I have to confess, I'm completely and utterly at a loss to understand what is going on at Red Bull. Because the ambience were down, track temperature was down, but rear tire pressures are down as well compared with Melbourne. It's only plus 1.5 on the rear now instead of 2.5 psi. But Max is saying afterwards, absolutely no grip at all, no balance, no grip, and that's it. It's all to do with what we're doing in the corners. And yet, let me start with a new paragraph now, which is, and I've said this before, for me, the best corner in China, in Shanghai, is turn 7. It's a great corner. It's a very, very fast 7th gear, left-hander, another left-hander. And it's uphill, blind entry when you're low down in a Grand Prix car. And it's basically flat. And last year, it was unbelievably quick. Max last year, going into turn 7, 274 kilometers an hour, and coming out at 283. That is seriously quick. And it's a very demanding corner because immediately you've got to sort of be ready for the downhill plunge into the right-hander turn 8. So it's a great bit of road. And it's always been a great bit of road. I remember Mark Webber in the Jaguar there, which was not a very good car. I remember Webber going in once. I was watching from the outside. It was absolute full stop, opposite lock going in. It was a seriously quick corner. Now, for everybody, that corner is from the minute they get to the top of the hill, which they're doing quite easily, and it's accelerating quite quickly, obviously, out of 6. These engines do have a lot of power when you get everything together. But from the minute they're basically turning in, the things are just going into engine cut mode, and they're just cruising through the corner with it's just ridiculous. To take the Fernando Alonso analogy, that's when the chef of the Aston Martin team can take over. And they're going through 7 now. Bear in mind, last year, 275, 278. Mid-corner now, on his quickest lap today, George Russell, 262, going down. And then they have even more then engine cutting as they're coming out. And he's coming down to 248 on the exit of 7. So it's just like, and that's what it is. Okay, let's just compare the mid-corner speeds. George Russell, 262, turn 7. Lewis Hamilton, 256. Charles Leclerc, 252. Another interesting point there. Lando Norris, 262, exactly the same as George. Oscar Piastri, 252. A bit weird, isn't it? The difference was between there, 10 kilometers. Max Verstappen, 252 as well. But here's the thing. Coming down the hill, before he hits the brakes for 8, Max Verstappen is doing 213 kilometers an hour, when George Russell's doing 250, 248, 250. So that's the lap time for me. But then you would say, well, why are Red Bull powertrain Ford, why are they doing that? Why are they doing so much engine harvesting there to the point where Max can just have his eyes shut and just, drone on downhill? I suppose because they work out based on the grip level they've got, the balance they've got, what they can do if they've got maximum power everywhere, how that lap would look. And then, of course, they've got to work out how they're going to harvest the power around the lap, given the amount of power they can use. And they realize what part of the circuit they can sacrifice most in order to get the most power for the rest of the lap. And in Max's case, I guess it's kind of, well, we're so slow there anyway, we might as well use that bit for harvesting. It can only be the explanation, because Max is so slow there that it's almost beyond belief. Now, I know that the tire footprint is smaller. I know there's less aero, but we're talking, Max last year, when he was doing 283 just before turn 8, he's now doing 213. So he's 50 kilometers an hour. Sorry, more than that. He's 70 kilometers an hour slower than he was last year at exactly the same point. That is, to me, that is absolutely ridiculous and a complete waste of a driver like Max Verstappen. No, I don't mean from a Red Bull point of view. I mean from a global perspective, enjoying a racing driver doing what racing drivers can do at the absolute limit, the great racing drivers. To have this setup now where he's going, I mean, it's 70 kilometers an hour slower than he was last year. It's 42 miles an hour in these new cars, because he's just doing whatever he's doing with the engine to harvest all that power. That's why I'm at a complete loss to understand. And Max then says, well, it's all to do with downforce and grip. Well, if it is all to do with downforce and grip, it's because they're having to harvest the engine at the point of least downside. It's a bit like in the old days when we used to have drivers like Max Verstappen or Charles Leclerc finding the moment of least downside to rotate the car, and they're not worried about how low their minimum speed is. It's a bit like that today on the overall lap. If you haven't got any grip, you then just have to work out, well, what's the worst corner for us? We'll just go unbelievably slowly through there, and that's what we'll do, and we'll try and get the grip back somewhere else, the power back somewhere else. Is that motor racing? Is that Formula One? And more importantly, turn 7, for me, the best corner in Shanghai, is now gone. It doesn't exist anymore. Yeah, there's an entry there, but so what? You're going so slowly coming out of it. It doesn't really matter what you do now. And that's, I've said that from day one, from the minute we first saw these cars turn a wheel, that what this formula is doing more than anything else is destroying all the great corners of Formula One. And Shanghai, of course, has this initial turn 1, and it's very graphic and it looks great, but it's not that demanding, as I've said all along. It's pretty line lock, there's a bit of banking, and a pretty average Grand Prix driver can do a very, very good job through there. And there wasn't actually that much super clipping going into at the end of the straight before turn 1, I guess because they were running, well, full batteries, I guess, because it's qualifying, but they still were, and it wasn't good. And it wasn't a good look at the end of the straight either, because they're going into the super click mode long before they get to the grandstands, which are long before the braking areas, and they're just cruising down there. What that must feel like for a driver, flat on the throttle, and then suddenly have the engine go off, I just can't imagine I mean, it must be such a, I remember how Ayrton used to say he would never miss a gear on the downshifts. He'd always go 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, or 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. He'd never go 5 to third, as a lot of drivers used to in those days, because he liked to feel every part of the car in harmony. And he always likened it to playing the wrong note on a piano if he ever missed a gear like that, or tried to jump to gear. Imagine what he would be feeling, sitting there on the straight, full throttle, waiting for your reward for having done a great job on that really fast corner exit, and suddenly the engine just loses power. Imagine, from Ayrton's point of view, how much time he used to spend with the Honda engineers finding how he could get another 10 revs out of the car compared with Prost in '88, and now he's just. I mean, it makes a nonsense, really, of the history of the sport and everything that racing drivers have had to fight for so many years. What else? There was one moment, a bit alarming, I thought, in practice 1. Well, practice, there's only one free practice for this being a sprint weekend. Going into turn 10, Lewis lost it going into turn 10, and it looked like his braking wasn't in sync with the redeployment, if that's the right word, of the active arrow. And although the wing was kind of there, it was pretty clear that the air hadn't attached itself, and he just had no downforce when he braked, and the thing just snapped. So that's the first time we've seen, I'd put that under the heading of an active arrow drama. And it was, obviously no issue in terms of a spin and then continuing. But I hope we don't see any more of those. I hope we don't see any more of those in going to turn one at Suzuka. Very good example. Anyway, we had that. And the other thing, which I didn't realize, but worth reporting, I think, is that they were not allowing practice starts from the exit of the pit lane. So you could only do your practice start from the pit box or on the grid at the end of the session, which means everybody's now done much fewer practice starts going into the sprint race tomorrow, which they've obviously done that from a safety perspective, proximity to turn one or whatever it is. But that means at a time when we want to have as many teams on top of the start procedure and minimizing the speed differential off the line, we're actually doing less practice at the moment, fewer practice starts than in Melbourne, which is a bit odd, I think. But anyway, we'll see what happens in the sprint race tomorrow. Let's hope that doesn't manifest itself in incidents on the line there. So just to recap a little bit on sprint qualifying tomorrow, Pierre Gasly actually quicker than Max Verstappen, which good for Pierre, really pleased. And we've been saying how that's going to Merc is obviously going to lift Alpine, and we're really seeing that for the first time. Good race drive by Pierre in Australia, but very, very good performance today ahead of Max. And then after Max, Oliver Behrman also looking very good. What a talent he is too. Excellent performance from him in the Haas Ferrari. And Isack Hadjar, again, looking like a really, really good other driver at Red Bull, albeit at a time when Red Bull not having a great run. It'd be interesting to see how long this continues. But Isack Hadjar, there or thereabouts within a couple of tenths of Max, which is what you always want from your other driver in Red Bull, and belying all of those that said it was going to be really damaging to his career if he accepted the Red Bull drive. He's doing a great job in that car, and Red Bull doing a good job of running him as well. Audi P11, Nico Hülkenberg on board, excellent. And interesting to see his mate Tom McCullough, who ran him for so many years, now back in the pit lane at Aston Martin. That's a very good move. I assume that's Adrian Newey suddenly wondering why such a good man had been moved sideways in the factory. So welcome back, Tom. Equally, at the same time, Aston Martin, Honda, not very good at all. Just, going around very slowly when they were going around, and not impressive. But we'll see what they've got in store for the race. I mean, this is the sprint. Maybe they'll try and... Well, they did almost get a sort of semi-Grand Prix distance in Melbourne, so we'll see what they're going to do there. But very difficult. The battery situation obviously hasn't improved for Aston Martin Honda, and with the Japanese Grand Prix coming up in 2 weeks' time, this is a real worry, isn't it? Anyway, that's the sprint. It looks like another Mercedes walkover. McLaren right there now with Ferrari. That should be a good race. Lando against Lewis, Charles against Oscar maybe. And of course last year Lewis did win the sprint race. So and he's always gone well in China. 2008, unbelievable performance weekend. Actually, it was quite interesting, I thought, we'll close on this note. It was quite interesting in the McLaren preview to this Chinese Grand Prix that they quoted Neil Oatley, one of the great engineers of Formula One history, let alone Williams and then McLaren, well, Beatrice as well, and then McLaren, and he's been around a long time now. But great to see that they gave a bit of space to Neil, and he was talking about that 2008 Chinese Grand Prix where Lewis just dominated the weekend from start to finish. And he was saying, it's one of the great races. And I thought, that's interesting, isn't it? There's a man with a brain reminding us that one driver can dominate all the practice sessions, qualifying and the race, very little overtaking, therefore, and yet it was considered a great victory. And that, good on you, Neil. Absolutely right. It was. And you don't need overtaking. You don't need this particularly mindless overtaking to justify it being a great Grand Prix. Anyway, we'll see what sort of overtaking there is tomorrow. When I say overtaking, I mean proper overtaking, into corners, heavy braking from high speed, none of this sort of drag racing, passing with power surges coming out of corners. That's not an overtake, that's just a place change. So that point has already been made, hopefully pretty clearly after Melbourne. Anyway, we'll see what happens tomorrow. Take care, see you then. The Mercedes continued their dominance of this year's Chinese Grand Prix with a strong win for George Russell in the sprint race and Kimi Antonelli taking the pole for the Grand Prix tomorrow. What of George Russell in qualifying, you ask? Well, he was very, very quick and always looked as if he was going to be on the pole. But on his last lap in Q2, George had a problem with the dreaded active arrow, with a part of the front wing flap not returning. And that was obviously worked on. They changed the nose, I guess, in the break between Q2 and Q3, the very short break. But on his first lap out in Q3, George pulled to what appeared to be a halt, but then managed to get back to the pits with an apparent electrical problem, which was only solved in time to give him one run right at the end with 3 minutes to go in Q3, by which time Kimi had done his second run. And here, got to give credit to Kimi Antonelli, because it's one thing to be quick with George in the garage. It's another to go out on your second run and confirm what you say is going to be your pole position with a 32.0, which he did before George had done his quick time in Q3. So really nice bit of pressure application there by Kimi Antonelli, I think, and very well driven lap, as we've been saying all along. Really good in terms of early turn in, getting the front to work. When you've got a good race car, even in these regulations, obviously a driver like Kimi can do a lot with it. And George Russell, good job under pressure. Just one lap right at the end, 32.3, to take the front row for Mercedes. And no doubt they'll get that problem solved for tomorrow. But when you've had a drama like that to do with the active arrow, you've also got to have a reasonable amount of confidence in the team as well, and the car that it's going to deliver. So I dare say George may have left a margin or two, but anyway, there we go. Mercedes underlining it yet again, how dominant they are. And it showed up in the sprint race. George, I think, put on a good show, won at the slowest possible speed. There were quite a lot of passes and repasses with Lewis Hamilton, as we said yesterday, really enjoying himself now in the Ferrari in the early laps of the sprint race. But I don't think anybody should have been deceived by that. It was a Mercedes easy 1-2. Kimi Antonelli had to recover from a poor start and was given a 10-second penalty for just passing Oscar Piastri as the safety car came out. So he got a 10-second penalty. But he made up for that, I'd say, by getting his first ever pole position in qualifying. Until that point, he had, of course, had that pole for the sprint race in Miami last year. So Ferrari, as I say, looking good in the sprint. Lewis using his tyres a little bit more than Charles in the early stages, but clearly confident in the car and what he can do with the car, and having a good needle match with Charles Leclerc. And when Charles' tyres started to show they had more grip than Lewis, lap 5 or 6, they were alongside one another, quite a lot of needle going on there. And interesting that Lewis managed to get Charles to come out with a fairly barbed radio message saying, doesn't Lewis realise how wide these cars are? There's not enough room for two around turn 3 or whatever it was. And that's good. That's good for Lewis. He's getting to Charles. As I said yesterday, these regulations for sure have taken away some of the areas that gave Charles an inherent advantage over Lewis Hamilton, the way Lewis was driving. And now they're pretty equal in what they're doing with the car. So we got a good battle between Lewis and Charles. And we saw that in the race, in the sprint race. Lewis didn't get the best of the safety car right at the end when they took a long time to remove Nico Hülkenberg's recalcitrant Audi, which had pulled to a stop after just going into turn 1 on the left. But there was a safety car restart. And in all that, they had a stacked pit stop at Ferrari, which lost Lewis time. Nonetheless, a very good performance from both Ferrari drivers on the day. But then we went into qualifying, and Charles looked very good in qualifying Q1, Q2 compared with Lewis. But Lewis got the lap in Q3. All credit to him. He's virtually the same lap time as Charles, but just ahead. That would really have annoyed Charles Leclerc, I think. And Lewis Hamilton now on the clean side of the grid as well. So yeah, very, very good all-round performance from Ferrari, and particularly from Lewis, taking it to Charles. I mean, obviously Charles' good. That's a given. We know how good Charles is, but Lewis is kind of not far away now. McLaren 5-6, Oscar Piastri just ahead of Lando Norris. First time he's looked so far this weekend to be stronger than Lando. He again, like Lewis, got the back end of the stacked pit stops in the back end of the sprint race. But in terms of lap time, Oscar only a tenth slower than Charles Leclerc. So as I say, McLaren slowly catching the Ferraris, which are catching the Mercs. No, I'd say the gap is about the same as it was in Melbourne. Mercedes still have, I think, quite a lot of margin. Pierre Gasly 7th, very good in the Alpine Mercedes, just ahead of Max Verstappen, who's a lot happier with the Red Bull today. Still, obviously not in Ferrari McLaren territory, let alone Mercedes territory. But today, Max a 33.0, Pierre Gasly, another great lap, you've got to say, 32.8. Not greater than Max Verstappen's, but great in the context of the midfield and his teammate and everything else. Really good performance from Pierre Gasly. Max then starts P8 with a 33.0. Not bad. Isaac Hadjar 33.1. I mean, this guy is good, isn't he? He's going to be within a tenth or two of Max at every race. He's probably going to out-qualify him a few times, I suspect. And nothing wrong with that. You know, that's what a teammate should be doing. And Max Verstappen still driving beautifully in that Red Bull and very calm today. And good to hear him on the radio saying, you know, yeah, car feels a bit better. So that's good. Isaac Hadjar at P9 and Oliver Behrman, no surprise really, P10. We're just almost taking him for granted now how good he is and how well he's driving and what he's getting from that Haas Ferrari. So excellent performance from him too. So Mercedes still well on top, a very dominant day for them. Even when things go wrong, they still manage to get the front row. They still manage to win the sprint race. I say go wrong, Kimi didn't have a great race. And that just shows how well balanced the team is as well. So congratulations to them. I guess that's all you can say, isn't it? Again, these regulations for me, that sprint race, a lot of superficial overtakes, nothing really real in terms of racing line, braking, out braking, and really doing things nicely. It's all to do with who's got the most energy management at a specific moment, and if they happen to be harvesting at that moment, round the outside you go, and it looks great on TV. Maybe that's what they wanted. And in the end, we're going to have to stop saying all this, I suppose, because it is what it is. But I'd like to see some proper overtakes and not constantly have to listen to chat about energy harvesting and deployment and what they're doing with all that, because that isn't really what Formula One should be all about. It should be about overtaking. It should be about maximum speed everywhere, maximum possible speed. So let's see what happens tomorrow. Thanks for watching. See you then. Okay, enough. You can only say so much about new regulations, this or that. In my case, about how some of the great corners on the planet Earth have been kind of castrated by the new regulations. But let's draw a line under that now, because it is what it is. We got to accept it, and we all love Formula One at the end of the day. And there's no doubt at all that the Chinese Grand Prix was a race to relish from start to finish, really. Non-stop action, non-stop pressure, non-stop spectacular Formula One doing what it does so well. Helped, of course, by how good the Ferraris are off the line. For the second race in a row now, we just saw them like jackrabbits off the line. Both Charles and Lewis had a good shot of taking the lead, but it was Lewis who started, of course, on the clean side of the grid, who got the run around the outside of Kimi Antonelli and led the Chinese Grand Prix at the end of lap one. I spoke yesterday of how well Lewis is driving now, how confident he is and how good he looked, particularly into that last corner onto the pit straight, entry to that last corner, and he led that first lap. Kimi then blasted past on the back straight. I say blasted past, they were both in sort of mega clipping mode at that point, but Mercedes, as ever, more efficient use, more efficient energy harvesting around the lap, able to deploy more energy at the back end of the back straight and straight past Lewis into a lead. He was then never to lose, incredibly. Kimi Antonelli going on to win, the young Italian, doing so much for Italy, along with Ferrari's resurgence as well, winning the race with abandon. Didn't therefore get the complete Grand Slam, i.e. pole, start to finish and fastest lap, because Lewis got that first lap. But otherwise, it was Kimi Antonelli all the way. Easy to say that, but Kimi Antonelli there with Uncle Lewis with his arm around him, very much belies his age. Just a superb performance in so many ways. I thought there were a couple of key moments for Kimi. One was after a safety car deployment caused by Lance Stroll stopping the Aston Martin Honda. All the leading runners came in, stacked pit stop in the case of both Mercedes and Ferrari. Mercedes running 1-2 at that point, Ferrari 3-4. And of course that hurt George Russell and Charles Leclerc, who was the second of the two Ferrari drivers. I don't often say that, but yeah, Lewis got the advantage in the stacked pit stop there. But Kimi coming out in the lead again, and then at the restart, now on a new set of hard tyres, which you'd take through to the end of the race, even though George is saying, oh, it's going to be quite difficult to do the rest of the race on these. I think that was just a sort of message to make Kimi sign of the garage a little bit nervous. But now they're on these hard tyres. And Lewis is looking very comfortable. The fuel load's gone down a little bit. He's got that new set of hard tyres. He's ahead of Charles. He's really starting to enjoy himself. Starting to enjoy the moment. Of course, any racing driver, particularly Lewis Hamilton, is never going to enjoy the feeling of the power going away underneath them in the middle of, say, turn 7 or at the back end of the straight. But at the same time, if you're up there dicing for the lead after where Lewis has been for the last, 4 years, then all of a sudden the world looks very bright and the sun is shining. And this was Lewis driving just as well as he had in qualifying, looking really good in the car. A lot of pressure on Antonelli at this point. Of course, Kimi had the better car, but not by much. He definitely had the better car, though, in terms of energy deployment around the lap, probably the way they could manage the tyres as well. but no mistakes from Kimi Antonelli under pressure. I thought that was a really impressive phase of the race. We're talking lap 12 to about lap 20, at which point the Ferrari's tyres did start to go away and Kimi was able to eke out a lead. And then at the backstage of the race, pressure from George Russell. George eventually got clear of both Lewis and Charles. Took him a long time. At one point he was saying those cars, those Ferraris are really quick in all the important corners. But of course Mercedes do have an advantage in the overall lap. Anyway, George gets away from them and now starts to put pressure on Kimi. Sets fastest lap. Kimi immediately responds with fastest lap and continues to set fastest laps and to consolidate his lead. He had one moment when the hard tyres right at the end started to go off and he flat spotted and locked up going into the hairpin, the back end of the back straight, and ran wide. No problem. Lots of runoff area there. Lost about 2 seconds. At that point, he had an 8-second lead, so he could do that. And he cruised around and won his first Grand Prix. So from George Russell's point of view, Kimi Antonelli, as a lot of us I've been saying, is going to win Grand Prix, has won a Grand Prix, and he's going to win more Grand Prix this year. But from George's point of view, another very, very good weekend. And from Mercedes' point of view, 2 1-2s in a row. This is starting to look like a complete steamroller, isn't it? Particularly to the backdrop of both McLaren and Mercedes not starting the race. And this is a problem that showed up in preparation for the race. This isn't something that happened an hour before the race. This is an electrical problem, an independent electrical problem, 2 different ones on both cars, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, and neither McLaren starting the race. I was trying to think of the last time. I'm sure somebody will have the answer. The last time 2 ultra-competitive cars, let's say 2 cars on the first 3 rows of the grid, neither car took the start of the race due to a problem like that. Just so embarrassing, so difficult, so frustrating. I guess that's the real word for McLaren Mercedes. But don't forget also George Russell had an electrical problem at the end of Q2 going into Q3 as well. He had that front wing problem, but then beginning of Q3 he was unable to go out and then he went right at the end when they got the electrical problem solved. So yeah, quite fragile, quite on the edge. Both Mercedes, factory Mercedes, running perfectly in the race. Both McLaren and Mercedes seemingly running perfectly in qualifying, but then absolutely hopeless in the race, didn't even start. So that was an issue. But anyway, let's not be too negative about any of this, because ultimately this new world in which we live is going to be with us. Formula One is what it is. It isn't going to change. And the Netflix generation is dominating Formula One's future in terms of what Liberty, the commercial rights holder, want to deliver for the Netflix generation. And they want to deliver lots of overtaking. They want to be environmentally friendly along the way. And it doesn't really matter at what cost that comes. In terms of purists like myself, and possibly some of you as well, if we're saying, oh, turn 7 is now not a real corner because they're just going into super clipping mode or backing off mode in the middle of the corner, so the exit's complete joke now. If we're saying that, the answer from the Netflix generation is, well, who cares? Nonetheless, it's a corner. And look at that. There's Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton side by side through turn 7. Now, I would say, yeah, quick entry, but then in the middle of the corner, they're both able to go side by side because they're way off their potential of what they could actually do there if they had a real amount of power to play with. But in terms of TV, does it really matter? I don't know. Probably not. You know, it probably looks great on TV, and I think a lot of people enjoyed seeing that. And just on that, great infighting between the 2 Ferrari drivers, Lewis versus Charles. 1, full marks to Ferrari for allowing them to race as closely as they did, and 2, full marks for the 2 drivers for keeping away from one another and not hitting one another. There was a moment around lap 28 when Lewis and Charles went side by side through the aforementioned turn 7, and they're both coming out obviously with nothing like the right amount of power, but Lewis now suddenly has the inside into turn 8. But to his credit, he doesn't do anything to overuse that and does nothing to stop Charles then getting the inside run into turn 9. And that was the race. I mean, it's a different sort of racing. It's not my sort of racing, not the sort of racing with which I've known, not the sort of racing I've known for the last, 50 years of watching Formula One. But it is side-by-side stuff that will have the fans on their toes watching it on TV. And if you're not worrying about how far away they are from the limit of tyre adhesion, and you're not worrying about how quickly they could be going through there if they had real power under their right foot, then it's spectacular. There's no doubt that it's spectacular. And in that sense, you have to say this new category already is very successful. So the two Ferrari drivers fighting like crazy. You think Charles had it for a while, then Lewis would repass him, having let his tyres cool down for a while, and then Charles would be looking strong. But towards the end, it was Lewis who'd done a better job with tyre management, whether by luck or judgment, I don't know, probably by judgment, I would think, knowing Lewis, and also by how good he was through that last corner onto the pit straight as well. He always had an advantage there, and that was really important obviously in terms of tyre management, and obviously in terms of how he could then harvest the engine going into turn one as well, and the available power that he then had in sector one going into sector two. So very good job by Lewis there. Highlighted, and here I am saying, turn 7 has been diluted, but actually that last corner, the left-hander, has been proved to be more important, I think, in this new formula than it's ever been before. Ironic that it was in that area that Lewis had his first drama in Formula One, real drama, wasn't it, in 07 when he went down the pit lane and spun in the pit lane. But that was a different thing entirely. We're talking about turn 14 and the entry and how good he was there. Just really nice to watch. And as a result of that and the confidence he was getting there, comparing Lewis now with Charles around the lap, there were 1 or 2 laps when Lewis would be sort of going a little bit wider, braking a little bit more in a straight line than Charles. But generally, if you took an average, he was pretty similar to Charles now. And he got P3. Eventually he won the battle and started to pull away, and Charles' tyres by then had gone off. And it was Lewis on the podium with the 2 Mercedes drivers. And you can see him there, as I say, Uncle Lewis with his arm around Kimi Antonelli. So, yeah, a great day for Lewis Hamilton. He would have loved this because, as I say, he's back there racing near the front. He's back on the podium. This will be so good for his self-esteem and his confidence going forward as well. These regulations have neutralized some of the areas in which Charles could have perhaps shown an advantage over Lewis. Turn 7, good example. But at the same time, it's enabled Lewis to really focus on the things he does well. So it's almost a double whammy. And Charles Leclerc reduced to being as quick as Lewis Hamilton, basically. And Lewis quicker than he was. That's not in any way to demean Lewis, but all of a sudden it's very close between the two. So you've got this great rivalry now between Kimi Antonelli and George Russell, and between Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. And if you look back through the history of Formula One, the great rivalries and the great racing indeed has been between these inter-team battles, whether it be Prost Senna, whether it be Mansell Piquet, whether it be Fangio Moss, you can go back, whether it be Peterson Andretti. There's so many examples of that, Peroni, Villeneuve. And here we have it in 2026. And we have it in spades, but we have it in a different way. I will always talk about that. I'll talk about that in the live streams. But in terms of the television viewer, that doesn't matter. Nor does it really matter, I've got to say, that neither McLaren started. I don't think the Netflix generation are that worried about there being 7 retirements or 4 drivers that didn't even take the start. What they were focusing on was Kimi versus George, the 2 Ferraris, and what was happening there. And even if Max Verstappen had a really bad day again, which he did, yet another poor start, a safety car at just the wrong time, just after he'd stopped. He started on soft just after he'd stopped for hard tyres. And then, he got the better of Pierre Gasly, which was something because Gasly had out-qualified him. So Red Bull making a little bit of progress there, but totally unable to do anything about Oliver Baumann in the Haas Ferrari, who was in front of him and was eventually able to pull away from Max before Max eventually had some sort of problem. They just said, retire the car. I guess it was some sort of power unit drama for him, and Isaac Hadjar had a bad day as well. So a difficult, very difficult weekend. The Netflix storyline there, I guess, is going to be lots of angst from Max now because he's an irascible racing driver who wants nothing more than to have a competitive car and a chance of winning on any given Sunday. And he doesn't have that at the moment. So it's going to bring out the anger in Max. And for all those that are expecting this 4 times world champion to handle it with aplomb and maturity and be calm, it ain't going to happen. Max Verstappen is going to be as angry as a caged lion. And he's going to be flying back as I speak, probably to Germany to do that race at the ring this weekend, coming weekend in the AMG Merc thing. And that'll be his expression of frustration, I think, more than anything else. I just hope he doesn't have any incidents at the Nürburgring because he's going to be well fired up now. So that's one story, I think. That's a Netflix storyline. And then inevitably, I think Red Bull Powertrain, like Aston Martin, Honda, will start to get it together as the season progresses. And that's a storyline as well. But there are undercurrents now to the key ones, which are can Kimi Antonelli, this young 18-year-old curly-haired Italian, can he go on actually to win the World Championship. He'll be waking up Monday morning in Shanghai thinking, I've got a real chance of being world champion. And that must be, what an amazing thing. What an amazing story that would be for Formula One in reality. You know, win, lose or draw in terms of the new regs. That is an amazing story. And congratulations to Kimi and to everybody at Mercedes that's had so much confidence in him over the years, from Formula 4 to where he is today, particularly Toto Wolff, obviously, in their driver academy. Just a great job. George, yeah, so George he'll need to stay calm at this point, because Kimi responded with amazing speed and resilience when George applied pressure, and that'll stick in George's mind. And the places where George, a bit like Charles Leclerc, the places where George historically would have had the advantage over Kimi, turn 7, I keep going on about turn 7, that's a good example. No longer an issue, not there anymore. So that's why this thing is so open now. P5, Oliver Behrman drove superbly in the Haas Ferrari. P6, Pierre Gasly, yeah, not so good on the hard tyre, but very, very good on the mediums, and obviously qualified extremely well. Good for Pierre to bring that Alpine back to P6. He's not going to start getting P5s, P4s without a P6 under his belt, and he's got that now. So very good for that team. Liam Lawson, another good drive, P7 in the Racing Bulls, ahead of Isaac Hadjar. An incident in the first lap, but went round and round, did actually finish P8, some points for Red Bull. Carlos Sainz, P9 for Williams Mercedes. Good drive by Carlos, typical Carlos Sainz, you know, from the back of the grid, gritty drive in the Williams. And P10 for Franco Colapinto in the other Alpine Mercedes. He started on the hard tyre, unlike Pierre, who started on the medium, and didn't come in at the first safety car, and was right up there, holding off, making it quite difficult for the Ferraris and the Mercs at the restart. Eventually, of course, they blew past him, but doing a pretty good job in the other car. That's a pretty good car now, that Alpine Mercedes. And Colapinto deserved some points today. Drove undoubtedly the best race of his career so far. So Kimi Antonelli has won his first Grand Prix, the first of many, absolutely for sure. Looking forward to that fight between him and George as the season develops, and equally as to what's going on at Ferrari as well. We'll have lots more this week in terms of content, live streams, going into the Japanese Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Thanks for being with us. See you soon.